I stood at the edge of the ballroom, clutching a small velvet box that contained a vintage sapphire necklace. Something my late wife, Marianne, had intended for this exact day. It was supposed to be a moment of unity, a celebration of love. Instead, the music died, the chatter ceased, and my daughter Jessica pointed a trembling finger at me from the head table. Her voice, usually so melodic, was sharp enough to slice through the heavy silence. "Leave now, Dad. My husband doesn't want you here." The room spun. Hundreds of guests, people I'd known for decades, stared at the floor or whispered behind their hands. I looked at Clinton, my son-in-law. He sat beside her, sipping his champagne with a look of bored detachment, a subtle smirk playing on his lips. He didn't need to shout. He had turned my own child into his mouthpiece. I wanted to scream, to demand respect, to remind them who had paid for the venue, the flowers, the very wine in their glasses. But I didn't. I simply nodded, turned my back, and walked out into the cold night air. What they didn't know, as I walked to my car, was that this humiliation wasn't the end. It was the signal I had been waiting for. If you have ever given your heart to family only to have it stomped on, please hit the like button on this video. It helps more than you know. And before I tell you how I brought their empire of lies crashing down, tell me in the comments where you are watching from today. If you want to see justice served, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what happened next wasn't just revenge. It was a reckoning. The drive back to my empty house was a blur of neon streetlights and rain against the windshield. I kept replaying the scene in my mind. Jessica's eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth I had known when she was a child. It wasn't just anger. It was dismissal. I was no longer her father, the man who taught her to ride a bike and held her when she cried over high school breakups. I was an inconvenience, a relic. I arrived home to a dark house. The silence was suffocating. For the last 3 years since Marianne passed, I had tried to fill this silence with hope. Hope that Jessica and I would grow closer. But tonight, the truth was undeniable. Clinton had finally succeeded. He had severed the last tether connecting me to my daughter. I poured a glass of scotch and sat in my armchair, staring at the unlit fireplace. The humiliation burned in my chest, a physical weight. I thought about calling them, begging for an explanation, apologizing for whatever imaginary slight I had committed. But then I remembered Marianne's last days. She had gripped my hand, her voice frail but her eyes fierce. "Watch him, Edwin," she had whispered. "He's patient, but so are we." I hadn't understood her then. I did now. The phone rang the next morning at 8 a.m. sharp. It was Clinton. I expected an apology, or perhaps Jessica crying, explaining it was stress. Instead, Clinton's voice was smooth, corporate, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Edwin," he said, skipping the pleasantries, "we need to discuss the lake house deed and the power of attorney paperwork we sent over last month. Jessica is very upset, and she feels that if you sign these over, it would show you're willing to respect our boundaries." Boundaries. That was the buzzword he weaponized. He framed my assets as his boundaries. "She kicked me out of her wedding, Clinton," I said, my voice steady despite the rage boiling in my gut. "And you want my property?" "It's about trust, Edwin," he replied, a hint of steel entering his tone. "You're getting older. You're becoming erratic. Last night proved that. We just want to protect the family estate before you make any more mistakes. Sign the papers, Edwin. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He hung up before I could respond. It wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum. I didn't call back. Instead, I walked down the hallway to the one room I hadn't touched since the funeral. Marianne's sewing studio. It was a sanctuary of fabrics, sketches, and books. The air still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume. I sat at her desk, feeling the crushing weight of loneliness. Marianne had been the intuitive one. She saw people's souls while I looked at their facades. I opened the top drawer, looking for comfort, maybe an old photo. Instead, I found a small brass key taped to the underside of the drawer. It was an odd place to hide something. Marianne was organized, never secretive. Beside the key was a sticky note with my name on it, written in her elegant script. For the lockbox in the attic. Use only when the wolves are at the door. I stared at the note. Wolves. She hadn't meant wild animals. She meant the man sleeping next to our daughter. I climbed the attic stairs, my knees protesting, and found the dusty metal box tucked behind a stack of old holiday decorations. My hands trembled as I inserted the key. The lock clicked open with a satisfying snap. Inside, there was no money, no jewelry, just a thick manila envelope and a leather-bound journal. I opened the envelope first. It contained a business card for a man named Lawrence Sterling, an attorney in the city, and a handwritten letter from Marianne. My dearest Edwin, it began. If you are reading this, Clinton has made his move. I saw the way he looked at our accounts when he thought we weren't watching. I saw how he whispered in Jessica's ear, changing her memories, twisting her love for us into resentment. I did some digging, Edwin. I hired people. What I found frightened me, but I didn't want to burden you while you were caring for me. Everything you need is with Lawrence. Trust him. And forgive Jessica. She is the victim in this, even if she holds the knife. Tears blurred my vision. Even while dying, she had been protecting me. She had seen the predator in our midst when I was too blind to look. If you have someone in your life who protects you, or if you've lost someone who was your shield, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel right now. Do it for them. Do it to honor the people who watch over us, even when they're gone. It's a small gesture, but it means the world. I called Lawrence Sterling immediately. He didn't sound surprised to hear from me. I've been waiting for this call, Edwin, he said, his voice gravelly and serious. Can you be at my office in an hour? Lawrence's office was in an old brick building downtown, smelling of mahogany and old paper. He was a sharp-eyed man in his 60s, exuding the kind of competence that made you sit straighter. He wasted no time. He pulled a thick file from his safe. Marianne came to me 6 months before she passed, he explained. She was worried about Clinton. She felt he was isolating Jessica. So we set up a contingency plan. He laid out documents that looked like complex trust funds. She restructured the estate, Edwin. But she also had me hire a private investigator, a man named Captain Miller. What he found on Clinton? Well, let's just say your son-in-law has a history of bad luck with wealthy in-laws. I opened the investigator's file. The first thing I saw was a photo of Clinton, 10 years younger, but with the same arrogant smile. But the name under the photo wasn't Clinton, it was Thomas. He changes his name slightly, or uses his middle name, Lawrence said, pointing to the documents. In Texas, he was Thomas. In Florida, he was Clark. He marries into families with significant assets and aging parents. He drives a wedge between the child and the parent, usually claiming the parent is abusive or senile. Then, he gains control of the finances through the spouse. Once the money is drained or the assets are transferred, the marriage dissolves. My stomach churned. It was a playbook. My daughter wasn't his wife. She was his host. He was a parasite feeding on her inheritance before she even received it. "He's doing it now," I whispered. "He's asking for power of attorney. He says I'm erratic." "Of course he is." Lawrence nodded grimly. "That's phase 2. The character assassination." I returned home with the file, my mind racing. I needed a strategy. Direct confrontation wouldn't work. Jessica was too brainwashed. She would run straight to him. I needed an insider. 2 days later, my granddaughter, Sophie, knocked on my door. She was 22, home from college for the summer. She looked tired, her eyes red-rimmed. She hadn't been at the head table at the wedding. Clinton had seated her in the back, claiming there wasn't room. "Grandpa," she said, shivering in the doorway. "Can I come in? Mom and Clinton are... It's getting bad over there." I ushered her in and made her tea. She sat on the sofa, gripping the mug like a lifeline. "He's recording you, Grandpa," she blurted out. "Clinton. He records every phone call, and he edits them. I heard him playing one back to Mom. He made it sound like you were screaming at him, but I know you weren't. He cuts the audio." "You've heard these?" I asked, feeling a cold fury settle over me. Sophie nodded. "I started doing it too. Grandma told me once, when I was little, that if things ever felt wrong, I should write them down. So I started recording him." She pulled out her phone. "I have hours of audio, Grandpa. Him talking to his friends on his burner phone. Him yelling at Mom when he thinks no one is home. Calling her weak. Calling you an old fool with a ticking clock." She played a clip. Clinton's voice filled the room, mocking and cruel. "The old man is softening. I'll have the deed by Christmas. Then we can dump Jessica and hit the coast." It was the smoking gun. But Lawrence had warned me that audio recordings could be tricky in court depending on consent laws. We needed more. We needed to prove a pattern of fraud. The next piece of the puzzle came from the most unlikely source. Mrs. Higgins, my neighbor 3 doors down, she was a retired librarian with a memory like a steel trap. She saw me gardening, or pretending to garden, and walked over to the fence. "Edwin," she said, leaning on the white pickets, "I saw that man at your house the other day. Your son-in-law. The one with the fancy car." "Clinton," I said. "Is that what he calls himself?" She squinted. "I could have sworn I saw his face on the news years ago. My sister lives in Scottsdale, Arizona. There was a big scandal about a developer's son who swindled a family. I never forget a face, Edwin. It was him." Arizona. The file Lawrence gave me had Texas and Florida, but not Arizona. This was a missing link. I called Lawrence and gave him the tip. He put Captain Miller on it immediately. Within 48 hours, we had it, in Arizona. Clinton, then going by the name Robert, had been charged with elder abuse and fraud, but the charges were dropped when the family settled out of court to avoid public embarrassment. The settlement had a non-disclosure agreement, which was why it hadn't shown up in standard background checks. But Captain Miller found the victim's son, a man who was now willing to talk off the record. He sent a sworn affidavit describing Clinton's exact methods: the isolation, the edited recordings, the claims of dementia. It was identical. We were dealing with a serial predator who had refined his craft. While we were gathering ammunition, Clinton fired his shot. I was served with legal papers on a Tuesday afternoon, a petition for emergency guardianship. Reading the document felt like reading a work of fiction. It claimed I was suffering from rapid cognitive decline, that I had become violent, citing the wedding incident where I was kicked out, and that I was squandering the family estate. It requested that Jessica, and by extension, Clinton, be named my legal guardians immediately. They weren't just after the money anymore. They wanted to strip me of my rights. They wanted to own me. Jessica's signature was at the bottom, shaky and smeared, as if she had cried while signing it. "This is a declaration of war," Lawrence said when I showed him the papers. "They want a competency hearing? We'll give them one, but on our terms." To beat the guardianship claim, I had to prove I was sane. I voluntarily submitted myself to a grueling 8-hour neuropsychological evaluation with the state's leading expert. I answered memory tests, solved logic puzzles, and underwent a full medical physical. The doctor, a stern woman named Dr. Aris, sat me down at the end. "Edwin," she said, "your cognitive function is in the 95th percentile for your age. You are sharper than most 40-year-olds I see. Whoever filed this petition has absolutely no medical basis for it." I walked out of that clinic with the golden ticket, a medical certification of absolute competency. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. When I walked into the courtroom, Jessica couldn't meet my eyes. She looked pale, thinner than I had ever seen her. Clinton, however, looked the part of the concerned relative. He wore a somber suit and held Jessica's hand, patting it theatrically. Their lawyer presented their case first. It was a woven tapestry of lies. They used the wedding incident, claiming I had caused a scene and attacked a waiter, a complete fabrication. They played the edited audio clips Sophie had warned me about, where my voice sounded raised and confused. I sat silently, watching Clinton. He thought he had won. He thought I was just an old man with a lawyer he couldn't afford. He had no idea what was in Lawrence's briefcase. When it was our turn, Lawrence didn't just defend, he attacked. First, he submitted Dr. Aris's report. The judge, a no-nonsense man named Judge Vance, read the conclusion and raised an eyebrow. "This report states the respondent is fully competent. Why are we here?" Then, Lawrence played the unedited versions of the recordings. Sophie had saved the originals from the family cloud account before Clinton deleted them. The court heard the truth. Me speaking calmly, followed by Clinton screaming insults. Finally, Lawrence dropped the Arizona affidavit and the investigation file on the judge's bench. "Your Honor, this is not a guardianship case. This is an attempted fraud by a man with a documented history of predatory behavior across 3 states. The color drained from Clinton's face. For the first time, his mask slipped. The judge dismissed the petition with prejudice, meaning they could never file it again. But he went further. He referred the evidence of the edited tapes to the district attorney's office for potential perjury charges. As we left the courtroom, Lawrence stopped Jessica and Clinton. He handed them a letter. "By filing this frivolous motion," Lawrence said calmly, "you have triggered the no contest clause in the Mariana State Trust. Effective immediately, all stipends, housing allowances, and future inheritances for Jessica and her spouse are suspended pending a review." We had cut off the money. The realization hit Clinton like a physical blow. The lake house, the cars, the credit cards, all of it was tied to the trust. He was broke. 3 days later, the silence broke. But it wasn't Clinton calling. It was Jessica. She showed up at my doorstep at midnight, rain-soaked and shivering, holding a small overnight bag. "He left," she sobbed as I opened the door. "Once the cards were declined, once the letter came, he just packed a bag and left." He said I was useless to him now. I didn't say "I told you so." I didn't lecture her. I simply opened the door and held my daughter while she cried the tears of a woman who realizes her entire life was an illusion. She was broken, hollowed out by a man she thought loved her. The next morning, I took Jessica into the study. I sat her down at Marianne's desk. "I need you to see something," I said gently. I placed Marianne's journal and the investigator's file in front of her. She spent 4 hours in that room. I heard her gasping, weeping, and occasionally pacing. She read about her mother's suspicions. She saw the photos of Clinton's past victims. She listened to the recordings Sophie had made of Clinton mocking her behind her back. When she emerged, her eyes were dry, but they were hard. The naivety was gone. In its place was the cold resolve of a survivor. "He never loved me," she said, her voice flat. "He loved your money." We didn't just let him run. Lawrence worked with the authorities in Arizona and the local DA. Because Clinton had used the mail to send fraudulent legal documents, it was wire fraud. We tracked him to a motel near the airport. Jessica insisted on coming with the police. She wanted to see him one last time. When the officers brought him out in handcuffs, he looked at us. He tried to sneer, tried to summon that old arrogance. "You're nothing without me," he spat at Jessica. Jessica stepped forward, standing tall next to me. "I was nothing with you," she said. "I'm my father's daughter, and I'm pressing charges." He was loaded into the cruiser. The divorce papers were served to him in his holding cell the next morning. It has been 6 months since that day. The house isn't quiet anymore. Sophie is here for the holidays, and Jessica is living in the guest cottage while she gets her degree in social work. She wants to help victims of financial abuse. We rebuilt our relationship, brick by brick. It wasn't easy. There were hard conversations and moments of guilt. But we are a family again, a real one, not one held together by lies. I finally gave Jessica the sapphire necklace. She wears it every day as a reminder of her mother's protection. We established the Marianne Protocol, a foundation to help families recognize the signs of predatory marriage and elder fraud. We are turning our pain into armor for others. If this story touched you, if you believe in the resilience of the human spirit and the power of standing up for yourself, please subscribe to the channel. Don't do it for me. Do it as a pledge to yourself that you will never let anyone silence your voice or steal your dignity. You are stronger than you think. Thank you for listening.